On today's Tanium Tech Talk, we'll take compliance module visibility yet another layer deeper to investigate compliance and vulnerability findings. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. And, scanning for configuration compliance is essential in IT these days. And sometimes you need more visibility into exactly why that control passed or failed. Well, today's show is packed with enhancements coming out of the Comply module. We've been spending a lot of time on that lately. And if you're new to Tanium, our Comply module does scanning for both configuration compliance and vulnerability management. And we're going to look at those latest features with Joel Gordon. Now, this is Joel's third time on the show. Joel, welcome back to the show. And I hear you've got a new title since you were here last.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. I think last time I was here, I was the SME lead for our Comply team. As of November, I'm now the technical product manager for Comply.
All right. Well, congratulations. So what does that mean for our audience?
Yeah. So, as the SME lead, I was primarily focused on enabling our field teams, our customers to be successful, not only in the operationalizing Comply, but being able to, support them when they run into any issues and escalate those to our engineering teams and otherwise. But as the technical product manager, I'm more focused on, the day-to-day operations of how we build our solutions and deliver them, working closely with our PM team to define our roadmap and really prioritize the features that we are trying to get out to our customers.
Now, I've heard a lot of chatter internally that we've been really focused on our Comply module lately, and we've been adding a lot of new features, and that's what we want to talk about in today's episode. Could you give us a little bit of backstory, like what's kind of the general view of Tanium and compliance and where we're headed, kind of overall what we're investing in right now?
As you mentioned, regardless of the organization or the size of a customer, everyone has that need to gain visibility of compliance configuration and vulnerabilities in their environment. And really, one of the things that we wanted to focus on was, not only being able to provide the capabilities to our customers to be able to, stand up and operate a mature vulnerability management program and compliance configuration management program as well, but we wanted to be able to, again, leverage the power of the Tanium platform to be able to provide that power of certainty in the data, right? And so when we talk about the investigations feature today, that's exactly what we are looking to do here, is giving you that next layer of visibility into why you may be vulnerable to a device that you may have thought you patched or remediated and it's still showing as vulnerable. Or maybe you're looking at your configuration compliance and, we saw this a lot over COVID with, a lot of our customers moving to a work from home and remote type environment where managing devices, whether it be through AD group policy or otherwise, becomes very challenging and difficult, right? And so being able to track, where your password policies are being set, right? And understanding, how I can go in and then remediate that, whether that be through enforce or using group policy or however you choose to remediate compliance configuration in your environment.
And I know while that's the headline on this release, you've packed a lot more other updates into this release. Could you tell us what else we could see when we go into the Tanium console for Comply next?
As of today, we have Comply 2.17 is the version that we have out for our customers. 2.17 added support for Juniper for our remote authenticated scanning. So this was a big one for customers to be able to have visibility into more device types. So you can run configuration compliance and vulnerability on your Juniper devices. The investigations feature, which we're going to talk about more today, we added some additional things to that where you now have the ability to download your investigation results directly from the workbench, giving you better visibility, like identifying the actual file path, for example, of a vulnerable file on an endpoint. One of the other things that we did was added some additional sensors for tracking things like the last scan date or the last found date for a vulnerability, like on an actual per vulnerability basis. For a lot of customers who are taking this data and they're like sending it out to a SIEM or a CMDB, they want to be able to get that level of detail as to when was this last scanned and when was this particular CVE last found on the device. So these are the things that, we've again packed into 2.17. This was a big one for us to get out here, and we've got a lot more coming this year.
Let's dive right in and take a look at what you've got.
You'll see here I'm in the console, and this is just a report that I created where I've done some customization to add some more context to what I'm about to do with this investigation. So this is something that as a customer, you can come in, you see the available columns here. I like to add things like the title, the affected product in this case, to give me some more information at a glance at what I'm looking at, right? Sometimes, if you're just looking at a list of CVEs and you see the scores and the severity, you don't get a whole lot of context at that point. And so this is one of the things that I've done here to kind of just give me some more context. And I'm going to take a look at the two vulnerabilities here that are impacting most of the endpoints in my environment here in my home lab. So this first one here, you'll see we've got a Notepad++ vulnerability where we see that versions 8.4.1 and before are vulnerable to a DLL hijacking, right? So this is a CVSS v3 score of 7.8. You see this is a high severity. But something that I wanted to call out too, because now that we have CVSS v3 scoring, which was something we actually added last summer, there are going to be vulnerabilities that have a CVSS v3 score, but don't have a CVSS v2 score and vice versa, right? So being able to have that visibility into both is really useful here. And, I can go ahead and click in my flyout, see all of the details about it, if there were applicable patches and the vulnerability definition criteria itself. And this is where, before we had the investigation feature, a customer could take a look at this. They'd maybe click through the vulnerability criteria to try to understand what exactly this definition is looking for on the endpoint. You also had the capability to go in and run a debug assessment on that endpoint, which will give you even more information, right? But what we wanted to be able to do is allow you to investigate this vulnerability across your environment straight from the console. And that's what the investigate button here allows us to do. So for this CVE, once I click the investigate button, it's going to take me over to this investigation view. So something to understand about investigations. So as of right now, investigations are going to go out and ask a live question to the endpoints that are online in the environment, right? So we know that our findings are going to be representative of both online and offline endpoints. By default, we're keeping that data for 30 days. But as of right now, when I run an investigation, it is going to be asking a live question to the environment. So endpoints that are online will respond, and I can start to see the results of this. So you'll see the metadata and information about the vulnerability is here at the top. We've still got the links that you can access to get more information. But here's where we start breaking down the results, right? So you'll see at the top here, we've got a summary of the test values. In this case, we had 4 values that came back that all evaluated as true. Now you can have true, false, error. And you'll see here, we also outlined the definitions types, right? So in this case, when we looked at this vulnerability and I hit the flyout, we see that there is a vulnerability definition, but there is not a patch definition, right? Notepad++ being a third-party application isn't something that would be available to you via patch, but you could absolutely use deploy, for example, to update Notepad++.
All right. So I just pause for a second for everybody who's kind of new to this. So we think about what exactly is going on here. So what's happening is we're scanning the environment and we're looking now to say, okay, is Notepad++ this version, is it vulnerable? And so you've got, it looks like 4 tests here that are executing on the endpoint to judge whether it's vulnerable or not. And now we can actually see which ones of those tests not only passed or failed, but why they passed or failed. Is that right?
Absolutely. That is exactly what we're looking at here. And ultimately, when we run the assessment now, we are storing what we call the actual values. These are now stored on the endpoint by default. So what we're doing here when we ask this question, we're taking the information that we already know about this vulnerability, which is on the server. So the things like the test description, the expected object, and the expected state. So this first one here, obviously, we're just looking to see, hey, is Notepad++ installed? And the expected state is, hey, the registry key that we're looking for is going to hold that information. And we'll see here that based on the information that came back for all 4 of my endpoints, we see that Notepad++ is installed based on this registry key. Now, the reason why I have these additional results here is because I actually have different versions of Notepad++ installed on these devices. And I can start to see that as I expand the details here. So for example, if I hover over this, you'll see that the version installed is 7.8.9.0, right? And if I look at the next endpoint, we have 8.1.4. And again, what we're looking for is anything that is below 8.4.1 is vulnerable to this DLL hijacking vulnerability, right? This last endpoint here, we see it's running version 8.3.3. So all three of these endpoints, or rather all three of these test values that came back, highlight vulnerable versions of the software across my endpoints. Now, one thing I can do with this information is once I'm looking at it, there's a cool feature here where I can actually view the XML of the test. And this is something that, again, if you're really interested in like how oval definitions work, which is how we are actually assessing the endpoint, this here will highlight to you the specific section of that definition that's being evaluated. And then I can actually go in from here and pivot into the affected endpoint. So if I click on view endpoints, that's going to take me to a view where now I can see this information scoped to the endpoints that returned as vulnerable in this case, right? So that first set of endpoints that we looked at, we saw that we had 2 endpoints that were running that vulnerable version. We see that the actual value here shows us that that version number is 7.8.9. We have a full file path, so we know where that Notepad++ executable is on the endpoint. And now when I have this information, I will get that full endpoint list, right? So we get the computer name, the ID, operating system, IP address, and the last found date. All of this information, again, as I said, we now added the ability to download this to CSV as well, right? So I can actually, from this first view, if I wanted to, I could just go in and pull all of this information. So I can get the high level just to download the test results, which is going to give me the information you see here and the count of endpoints, or I can get it with the detailed endpoint list information, which is going to give you the computer name, IP, operating system, in addition to all of the actual value data that we found. So we'll be able to see the version of Notepad++, the specific file path of where the executable is on the endpoint, and we'll have that for all the endpoints that flagged for this vulnerability that responded to the question at the time.
From your experience working with customers using these CSV reports, where do they typically take those next? Are they going to a team that's supposed to go remediate things? Because Tanium could do that remediation as well. Maybe it's going into a change control. What do they do with those reports?
Yeah, I would say the most common use case is going to be being able to provide this information to a remediation team. And actually, the next vulnerability I'm going to show you as an example will probably talk to that a little bit more, because oftentimes the remediation is not as simple as just, well, I need to apply this patch, or, I need to update this version of the software. So let's actually talk about that a little bit real quick here, Ashley, because when I, as a remediation team, have taken an action that I think is supposed to address the vulnerability, and my vulnerability team comes back and says, hey, your device is still vulnerable, that's where being able to provide this level of detail can help me cross the finish line on remediation. So looking back at our original view that we're at here, let's take a look at the second vulnerability. Now, this is one that comes up, and I've actually spoken to many customers about this vulnerability over the years. It's from 2013, right? But why is this one that still flags up and people ask questions about? It is a high severity vulnerability on the CVSS v2 side, but again, it is a much older vulnerability, so it doesn't have a CVSS v3 score. Doesn't mean that it's still not important for you to address it. When we look at the investigation for this particular CVE here, we're looking for a WinVerify trust signature validation, right? That's what essentially this particular vulnerability is looking at. And when we do an investigation here, we're going to see some more information. So what we're going to do here is, as we look at the investigation for this vulnerability, we're going to see a lot more information. And understanding this information is key to understanding why it is vulnerable. So there are many different checks involved in this definition. But the one that rises here to the top is check if the AuthentiCode signature verification feature is enabled. And this here, when you see WAL 6432 node, that makes me think, okay, so this is something that, would apply to both a 64-bit system or a 32-bit system. And when we look at the details here, we see that the expected object, this is the state that needs to be met in this case to address this vulnerability. We need to have the enable cert padding check for AuthentiCode signature verification feature. That needs to be enabled. And when I look at the XML here, you see that, again, this is a registry key that needs to be in place. And we see that actual values is no matching objects, which means that even though I may have already patched these endpoints, there is a registry key that also needs to be set. And this is something that is very common with Microsoft, is that often to address a vulnerability, when I apply a patch, there may be additional steps that are needed to be taken by the user or the administrator. And in this case, that additional step would be to make sure that you have this feature enabled by applying the necessary registry key to the impacted devices, which again, you now have the ability to do that with Enforce. You can do this with an Interact package, a lot of great ways to be able to move in and actually go to remediation. But being able to provide this to my remediation team gives them that certainty about what needs to be done to address the vulnerability on the endpoint.
Classic conversation, right?
Yeah.
So here's the list. It goes across the wall to the remediation team. The remediation team does their work, and then the original scanning team comes back and says, "Hey, I thought you guys fixed this."
Yeah.
And this is where they go to find, oh wait, it looks like there was an extra step or something we didn't anticipate.
That's right. So the last part I did want to touch on real quick was talking about how we do this for compliance, right? Because obviously vulnerability is one side of the coin. And when we look at compliance, we have the same capability, right? So again, I'm looking at my compliance view. In this case, I'm looking at a single endpoint. This is a rel box where I run a CIS benchmark, right? And in this case, I've got a mix. I've got 140 pass findings and I've got some fail findings. As I was looking through here, I was like, okay, here's a password check that we're looking to ensure that all passwords or all users' last password change date is in the past, right? And I've seen that this has failed on this device. So again, I have the ability to select that. All the information is here. I can pop into investigation. And when I complete that investigation, I see that on my device, I have this one fail finding for this endpoint where, again, my user's last password change was never, which means when I set up this VM in my environment, I set the password for this user one time and I've never gone in and changed it. That's obviously a big problem in a production environment. You certainly would not want to have that wide open. You need to take the necessary steps to address that, right? And that's where, from a compliance standpoint, the remediation and fixed text information, that is all available. So a lot of times customers will get this out through Connect or through the Workbench assessment exports. But when I quickly look at the results of the investigation, two things I want to point out here. So not only do I have the ability to view what the output was, so in this case, it's identifying the user here where the password has never been changed. This particular check is called an SCE check, right? So that's going to be called a script check engine. And this is something that is used in a lot of like non-Windows type benchmarks. So you'll see SCE checks used a lot in your Linux and Mac benchmarks. We have this awesome feature here where you can actually view the script details. So again, in this particular CIS benchmark, this actual script is used to view what's going on the endpoint. So a lot of times when I talk to a lot of like Linux administrators, they want to know what is actually running on the device to perform this check. We give you this information here. So if I wanted to validate it, I could take this script and run it directly on the endpoint if I wanted to.
And I just have to say, just as a former scripter, looking at that in an editor with syntax highlighting and color coding, that's just beautiful. Because I mean, you think about some tools where it would just be some like XML blob and they just dump out, here's the code. But this is, I know it's a small thing, but it's just rendered beautifully.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shout out to the team on this one. This was one thing that once we did add this, I love to see it. This is something that we also have like in our sensor editor. So it's nice to kind of see that continuity across the board in our product. So the one other thing I just want to show real quick here, again, when we look at investigations on Windows, right? So I ran a scan here on Windows 10 using the BitLocker profile. I've got my endpoints where this check has also failed, right? And this is looking for a recovery password, right? Ensuring that you do not allow a 48-digit recovery password. BitLocker recommendations is to use something more secure than that, right? And ultimately, the information that we provide here in remediation tells you how you can address this in group policy, right? So I could take this information and I can pass that to my group policy manager and say, hey, we need to ensure that this is put in place. But again, this is something that you could also address, for example, with Enforce, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you look at this XML, this is all based on a registry setting that's set on the endpoint. So if you are having to manage endpoints that are not managed by group policy, you can absolutely enforce this using our Enforce module or just an action to set that registry key and set that enforcement on the endpoint, rerun your scan, and you'll start to see these things go from failed to pass as you take these remediation steps. So it's pretty awesome to be able to have this capability here in the product, being able to take this information from investigation and pivot that directly to your remediation teams and your configuration teams to start getting you in a better posture from a security standpoint in your environment.
And I'm going to sound like somebody out of marketing when I say this, but that's the point of the platform, right? One agent, scan it, find it, fix it, right? Find it, fix it, find it, fix it. That's what we do as a platform. So you don't have to have all those other tools out there competing with different sources of truth. One source of truth for the finding and the fixing. That's just efficiency right there.
Absolutely. So the one last thing I did want to point out here. So, one of the things that I love to say is, let's not let perfection get in the way of progress. And I think that one of the things that I love about Tanium and being here is that, we love to innovate. We love to be able to provide, value to our customers. But in my mind, the work is never done. There's always a lot more that we can do to improve on it. And even with this release that's just come out with these improvements to investigations, we've got more in the pipe. A couple things that we're going to be doing with investigations is allowing for this data to be exported through Connect. A lot of customers love the investigation workflow for ad hoc investigations, but they want this information as part of their actual data feeds for both vulnerability and compliance. So this data is going to be available through the Connect plugin as well. So you can start using this as part of your data feeds. We're working towards actually utilizing TDS to get this information as well, which is going to be a huge performance improvement over doing live questions. But not only that, it will give us visibility for investigations into findings for endpoints that aren't online, right? So when I run my scan, that information is always going to be collected from the endpoints. So I don't have to wait for an endpoint to be online to perform an investigation. I will have the latest information from the last time that endpoint was online, which is going to be huge.
So as a reminder, TDS, Tanium Data Service, is exactly what Joel's explaining here, right? So that's that little service in the background that goes out and scrapes data off endpoints so that if it happens to be offline, when you ask a question, you hit that cached button, right? Our modules can leverage that as well. So now your reporting times and comply and your charts and all that are going to be a lot faster. Man, that's a great enhancement.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, I think that one of the things that, really proved this is that this was something that, customers, had asked about. This is not a net new ask at all. And, with Comply, there's a lot of things that, we've got in the pipe this year to deliver to address some of these, asks from customers. Things like exception management is another big one that I'm excited about us launching this year. And we have another feature coming. Some of you guys may be familiar with SBOM, which we have in our asset module today. And SBOM was something that we wanted to be able to bring that capability. SBOM, by the way, stands for Software Bill of Materials. And what SBOM allows us to do is actually start to look at your software supply chain vulnerability. So when we bring SBOM vulnerability and Comply, that's taking it to the next level for us to be able to start looking even deeper into the endpoint, leveraging index to get this information. The last little nugget I wanted to share as well, and this is something that has really been near and dear to me because, one of the things that a lot of our customers in the vulnerability management side have been asking about is like the CISA KEV, right? So CISA is the Center for Internet Security. And when we talk about the KEV, that's the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. This is where CISA will go out and identify vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild. And that is something that absolutely you want to take into account when it comes to prioritizing your remediation. Just showing you this real quick here as a sneak peek. We've got the CISA KEV support that's going to be coming out as well here, where we show you the information about a vulnerability as it relates to the CISA KEV. So the vendor, product, the description that CISA puts out there, as well as the date that it was added to the catalog and the due date, which is essentially when CISA encourages agencies to take action from a reporting and remediation standpoint on that vulnerability.
So if I'm following you right here, right? So I've known about CISA KEV, right? So the known exploited vulnerabilities. In other words, if you have a vulnerability that shows up in your environment, and not only is it, it's one thing to say, okay, we know this is a potential vulnerability, but this is more than a potential vulnerability. It's in use right now in the wild, and it's in your environment. That's a recipe for disaster. So 100%. That's why this is valuable. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
To me, this is the alarm bells. This is where if I go into my environment, this is the first thing I'm going to be looking at is not just the severity, not just the number of endpoints impacted. I want to know what is actively being exploited in the wild today, where, again, this is something that we now make part of our Tanium vulnerability library build, right? So CISA now is adding vulnerabilities at almost once a week, at least, where I'm seeing that, they send out an email where they've added, multiple vulnerabilities at a time to this list. So this is something that we want to continue to integrate not only into comply, but we want to get this into reporting as well. So you can build dashboards, trigger alerts around this information. So really excited to be bringing this out here and just had to share that with you guys today.
Yeah. Now, this is a teaser. All right.
This is a teaser. Yeah.
Not in there today, but very soon. And I know we can't get a date out of you, Joel. You're not allowed to tell us when exactly, but it's coming very soon. So that's exciting to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But speaking of which, though, the investigations that we talked today, when is that available? When can customers expect to see that in their environments?
That is live in environments now, my friend. So 217 is out. It's available for both cloud and on-prem customers. So they can start taking advantage of this now. Again, some of the enhancements that we talked about today, the ability to download a CSV, the full file path, we added that in 217. We initially put investigations out there at the end of last year. So right in December of 216 is when investigations feature first came out. And as I said, we have been quickly looking to iterate and improve upon it, and there's more to come.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for this view of what's new in comply. Anything else as we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things that as we talk about, exploited vulnerabilities, another thing that we're really excited about bringing to the product is exploit intel information, getting that in addition to not only what is actively being exploited based on CISA, there's a lot more information to know about exploits, and whether that's understanding what proof of concept code is out there, what active campaigns are out there. I mean, these are all things that, to me as a vulnerability manager, like that is pertinent to my role. These are things that you want to know about. Ultimately, our customers don't want to be in the news for a breach, right? And that's what we want to be able to give them, the capability and the information that they need to be able to prioritize and take action quickly in their environments. And that's what I'm just, again, really excited about this year, in addition to the other features that we're launching, adding additional platform support for our scans, getting closer to that point where you can really use Tanium Comply to scan everything in your environment. That is our goal, to get to the point where, you have that capability and that confidence to be able to use this as your primary solution.
Thank you for this tour of what's new in comply. And wow, I mean, this is really delivering on Tanium's mission to give our customers the capability, the weapons they need in the fight to go find it and fix it. And here we can see that going even deeper, digging down into that vulnerability posture on the endpoint for both vulnerabilities and for compliance configurations, seeing exactly where the smoking gun is, so to speak. Here's where we saw this thing that unfortunately it's not entirely remediated yet, right? So that's really critical data when you're in the trenches every day trying to close these gaps. So thanks for that. And as always, we have some resources for you in the show notes below. Check those out, links to community and docs and so forth. And that'll be more good takeaway information for you. Then go back, read through, share with your team so they can see exactly what's available now and comply. So there you have it, folks. More goodness from the Tanium Innovation Engine. And until next time, Go-Tanium.
With all the stuff that we have in the pipe for this year, like we want to go on a little PR tour because we got a lot of awesome stuff to show off, and we definitely want to get people excited about it.